All right. Can you all see me? Can you hear me? All right. So if you guys can hear me, say something in the chat. Let me know. All right, guys, bear with me. Sorry about the technical difficulties. Uh, I've never, every time I've always been able to do my streams, I've always been able to pull up my microphone and my camera without a problem. And all of a sudden today, it's just been crazy. So I apologize. I don't know about this quality. This quality looks like crap. I don't even know. Sorry about that. I don't know what's going on with all of this stuff. So just bear with me. I'm working on it. There. And let me know. Does that look better? All right. So, all right. Now that we got this weird long delay, all right. So, Stacey, if you're out there, I sent you a link to Gmail so you can join this so we can get going. I sent it to your Gmail, so you should have the link now. All right, is my mic way too loud? Sorry about it. How about if I back off the mic a little bit? Is that better tonight? See, there's a lot of weird problems with audio and microphone issues. It's weird. I don't know what happened. So I got everything working again, and there's some kind of experimental audio boost or something that the StreamYard is doing. So, but anyways, guys, it's so good to see everybody. So I appreciate everybody that's here, and we're gonna get Stacey in here. Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
All right.
Sorry for the major delay. I don't know what happened. It was like, and I didn't even have a lot of time. I was working late, and I'm like, oh man, at the last minute, like no microphone, no audio, and it just kept telling me. And then I pulled up my Streamlabs, and it was working, but then I couldn't do Streamlabs. It was going to be a whole ordeal. It was just something crazy going on with StreamYard, and I don't know. I tried rebooting all this stuff, shutting down my computer, ran out of time. It was 9 o'clock. I'm like, oh my God, it was so crazy. So we got Stacey Tallitsch, folks. Welcome to the show, Stacey. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. Technical issues have been a thing lately. You know, my whole system, granted, it was during when the hurricane came through, but it literally sent a power surge and fried my hard drive.
Oh.
So I ended up having to get a new hard drive and salvage what I could off of the cloud. So I'm still playing with all my settings all over again, like it's a brand new.
How's everything else? You got everything else in order after the hurricane?
Yeah, I mean, it was the power was really what was the issue. You get wind coming through and sending surges, and my UPS actually got fried too, so I had to buy another one of those. But you know, everything else was fine. Not even a garbage can thrown down. It was just
nice. It's weird too how some of that works. I know, like I've been through a few of them. I lived in the Panhandle of Florida for like 13 years. My wife grew up there, so they call Southern Alabama.
Yeah.
So we've been through a few. So yeah. What is it? Bob says, no problem, Josh. As you get older, you'll be surprised at what's not working anymore. That's funny. Oh, Bob, you always make me laugh, buddy. All right, it's good to hear from you. Okay, everybody. So let's get going, shall we? All right, because I was excited that we got Stacey on here tonight to talk about some witchcraft. and whatever else we may end up talking about. Who knows? You know how the show goes. But first and foremost, I definitely wanted to say, everybody, so a little bit of a warning when we start getting into certain parts of paranormal. Some people can get triggered or butthurt or just scared about some things, but hopefully you'll enjoy tonight. I think we're going to cover a lot of education. I'm going to sit back. I'm going to let Stacey do a lot of the talking tonight. I'm going to let him educate us on some things. I'll ask some questions for you all. And if you guys have questions, by all means, pop them in the chat. This is your chance, because I know witchcraft has a stigma about it, right? There's a lot of myths and legends, and some people are like, hey, it's super evil, and some people are like, oh, it's good, or some people it's like it's in between, it's a little bit of both. So let's dive right in, and I'm going to turn it over to you. Why don't you start with maybe like the origins of witchcraft, and what particular part of witchcraft you want to talk about?
Well, witchcraft, we can talk about pretty much on a global scale, because it's one of the things that is pre-Christian in a lot of ways. There's two different paths of what's known as witchcraft, which is a slander. First of all, that's a term that was coined by the Catholic Church so they could go after people who were non-believers. I mean, Jews were included in that too. So was, Islam. They were all practices of witchcraft because it was the universal, it's like pedophile,
Right.
everybody was afraid of it, kind of thing. But in practicality, you had two different kinds, in that you had the religious side, where there was actual deities that were worshipped and things of that sort. Then there was folk magic, where it was just basically like an earthly or an earth-based chemistry set, where
Right.
they used everything from leaves and twigs and things of that sort to try and conjure medicinal purposes of curing this, protecting from that. And there was no deity actually involved. The closest they ever came was talking about spirits. Then you had the religious side, which, depending on what culture you're talking about around the world, they had, like, the Druids were a religious sect that organized religions around particular deities. The Norse had their deities. Of course, that was all considered witchcraft too, but they actually had religions that they adhered to. In Africa, all of that. Unfortunately, on the religious side, the Catholic Church was very effective in basically making them go extinct. Everything from, the Druids and the Norse and Greek mythology, all of that was effectively wiped out on a religious scale. The priests went away. Now, in the 20th century, there was a resurgence, the neo-pagan movement, where they, through research, resurrected a lot of these practices. Not all of them. The mysteries themselves have been lost. And there's only a few religions that actually have been unbroken. Hindu is one of them. It's religion from pagan times that has still survived basically the Inquisitions and all of that. And the African traditions. Ironically, they were saved by and large by the slave trade. They were brought from Africa to the New World, and the slaves of the New World kept it going. And those that were separated from their families and such, they remembered what their parents did and tried to continue on with it, which is where you get a lot of the folk magic here in the United States. The hoodoo. Hoodoo is the folk magic. Voodoo is the religion.
Okay.
And you can separate the two, but they're actually born of the same thing.
Okay.
And people who, in my courses, I have several courses on hoodoo. All the practices in there have originated from the African traditions, like Palo or Lukumi or Ifa, which in modern parlance we would call Santeria.
Right.
Or, Palo Mayombe is still hardcore old world 6,000-year-old practices. But the New World is actually what allowed them to be preserved, because in Africa, by and large, it's gone almost completely Christian. Those
Right.
religions that were there are scarce, and those that are there are in hiding because they're actively being persecuted,
Right.
both, actually. They have women who were accused of witchcraft over there to this day. The UN has basically gone into these villages and set them up in refugee camps. They have witch camps, people who've been accused of witchcraft because, the villagers, they do medieval stuff to witches. They
Just like
burn them.
like the Middle Ages when they had
Oh,
the
yeah.
witch hunts.
Oh, yeah. They burn them. They cut them. We're talking girls as young as 6 years old are being accused of witchcraft. And, they torture them to death, trying to get them to, stop cursing the village. And the only thing different about them is there'll be a black girl, 6 years old, who has blue eyes.
Right.
That's what makes her a witch.
Like just some kind of different generic trait or odd trait,
Right.
That defies the normal heredity or something, right?
Right. Or albinos.
Right.
If you're in Africa and you're an albino, you are a witch. And they'll actually kill people who are albinos and then start cutting them up as elixirs. You mix body parts in with your food, and it's supposed to give you, all kinds of nuts, but a lot of that is modern day, the missionaries coming in, pointing out this is witchcraft, right. Things of that sort. But
now question. So I did study some divination stuff with some of the cultures, all the way back from the Mesopotamians and different cultures, the Egyptians and stuff. So were the ones that practiced divination, were they also usually the ones that were doing the healing and maybe some of the witchcraft?
Yes.
Also, is that what they were also doing, like divination? They were kind of like the shaman of the tribes, or?
Exactly.
Okay.
Because, someone who's a shaman or a medicine man or whatever it is, they know what rituals to perform. They just don't know what ritual to perform. Divination to find out which ritual they need to perform.
Right.
The process. And whatever it is, there be shells, coconut shells, seashells, bones, you name it. Chicken bones are a big thing for divination. I've never been able to read chicken bones. Shells are one thing, but chicken bones, whatever. There's an art to it. I'm more of a technical guy. It's either yes or no.
Right.
Yeah. Shells do that.
And the sheep's liver.
Yeah.
That was big for a long time, and entrail reading and stuff. And that was some crazy stuff that they would use for divination. But there was all kinds of things, because you even had the birds. They would use whether the birds took certain flights.
Mm-hmm.
There was all kinds of stuff. But yeah, so
yeah.
So they would consult with the signs, right? Whether you're rolling bones or looking to the stars, you consult with the signs, and then you can apply certain spells and enchantments. And they were also healers, though, right? Too. That's what you're talking about with plants and herbs and cutting of things.
Right.
It was a lot of their healers. I think I talked a little bit about this with the origins of getting into Halloween, where some of these women were some of these old school healers that was a family tradition that was held down to them, and they were probably the eccentric ones, and ultimately ended up being cast as witches.
Right. Well, and a lot of that too is the fervor for getting rid of witches didn't really come about until until the Malleus Maleficarium was published. And actually, I don't know if you can see it.
There it is.
Yeah. This is the how-to manual on how to discover witches. And a lot of it is based off of stories that were supposedly given in confession who were the victims of witchcraft. And they compiled this in a book on how you can tell who's a witch and all that. And some of it's pretty crazy. I mean, they've got some of it is a complete ripoff of other books. The
Right.
Transformations of Lucius. That was a novel, a fictional novel written by a priest of Isis in 500 AD. It's basically 1,000 years prior this book was written.
Right.
And you would probably know this story from the Disney movie The Emperor's New Groove.
Okay.
That was the story that Disney took, which was called The Transformations of Lucius. They published that as a factual story that can be used in court in prosecuting witches.
Jeez.
One guy in confession apparently told this story that a witch got mad at him for not leaving his wife, so she did a spell to make his penis leave his body and then basically fly away, and she would feed it corn nuts, and only until he would leave his wife would it come back to him. That was actual evidence in court.
That's crazy. I mean, can you imagine just sitting there in court and they're trying to explain this to you with a straight face? They're talking about this penis flying and somebody feeding it and stuff like. I mean, that's got to be crazy. I could not imagine sitting in some kind of old school courtroom or something. Thou shalt eat corn nuts in my penis.
I don't know what that was supposed to prove or how it was supposed to be proven, but it was evidence, and they use that throughout the Middle Ages. In the book itself was discredited by the Pope, but because of how fast communication moved throughout the Middle Ages, it went on for years, where the Pope had discredited it, but nobody knew.
Right.
As a matter of fact, there was a whole business where you had witchfinder generals who would come into a village, charge the village an ass ton of money to get rid of the witches, and then he would go around pointing at people saying, "That's a witch, that's a witch, that's a witch," and they would persecute all these people because he was the general who knew who was a witch and who wasn't.
Right. He's the expert.
He was the expert.
Jeez, that's sad. I mean, that's a lot of trauma. I mean, that's a lot of trauma. That's a lot of just death and horribleness. That's why I guess I'm in business with ghosts. I mean, geez. But so what is the allure of people? Why would they want to get into witchcraft? Like, why would they want to? Like, I mean, is there a what would be their purpose in it?
Well, some people are drawn to it simply because they sense things aren't the way that they're supposed to be. Depending on your upbringing, you can feel that you're not being told something. There's more out there. I mean, that's what you're doing now when you look for ghosts. There's more out there than you're being told, and you're curious and you want to find out. And you read about witchcraft, you see some spells, you try a few things to see if it actually, cause and effect, and turns out that it's actually a real thing. To me, and I'm explaining this in a way that is very common. I'm a computer guy. I was in computers for 20 years. So a lot of the things that I see and deal with are binary. It is true or not true.
Right.
And at the same time, I'm, the priest in Palo Mayombe, an African tradition. Those things typically don't jive.
Right.
But if you look at it, the way that I have my courses laid out, they're all practical application. Remote viewing in my courses is about downloading information from the universe and then using that in a practical application. It is information that is in the universe, anywhere, person, place, thing, or event, anywhere in space, time. If it existed ever, you can download it and remote view it. Spells and witchcraft and hoodoo and all of that, that's uploading information. Where the universe actually responds to the information that you see. So you have basically like a computer, you upload and download information, because that's all everything is. When it comes down to it, is information. E equals MC squared. The MC square is information. Energy cannot exist without information in a physical form. You take energy by itself, it's static. You put information into it,
All right, Stacey, there. Looks like your internet might be hanging up a little bit. Not sure. Could be on my end. I don't know. Are you guys seeing me? Or is it just Stacey froze? Are we both froze? I don't know.
There we go.
All right. All right. So apparently I was still streaming. So I was still good. I guess you got hung up on your.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah.
All right.
My Wi-Fi was screaming. I don't know what's going on.
Well, it happens. Whenever you stream live, who knows? Things like that happen. So, all right. So yeah, they said you were freezing. They could hear me, but you were freezing. So who knows? But so you were talking about the upload and download of the universe. So we got most of all of what you said right there to almost the end there.
Right.
And that's a great way to think about it. It really is, and it makes sense. So I forgot too. Right before you froze, I was thinking I had a question for you too on it. But one thing I do want to tell people too, just to remind people, Stacey Tallitsch has courses available on Udemy, and that's when he talks about his courses. Make sure that if you guys are interested in any of this stuff and you want to learn more about these topics that he brings up, again, he's got courses on these things, and they're very affordable too. I mean, seriously, like it's not, you're not going to break the bank, and they're amazing courses. And I was working on the remote viewing course. I really am enjoying it. So guys, that's why I wanted to take a moment, let you know when you hear him talk about these courses, hey, if you want to dig in deeper and really get into what he teaches out there, go check it out on Udemy. Okay. So anyways, so back to witchcraft. So Bob has a question. He says, would let me put this up here. Maybe you'll see it. Would Reiki, which some Christians call a laying on of hands, be considered witchcraft back in the day?
Yes. Anything that was outside the Bible or the official edicts, bulls of the Pope was witchcraft. If it didn't fall into that category, even some things that were apocryphal within Christianity were considered witchcraft, like the Gnostics, the Testament of Thomas. These things were apocryphal because they did not conform to the figurehead of the Vatican. So that was paramount, the whole thing. It was a government first and foremost.
Right.
It was religion secondary.
They had all the power then. They were extremely powerful back then.
Yes.
The power.
Which, if you think about it, was completely unmerited because they didn't have a military. All they had were the kings that were Catholic doing their bidding, like Charlemagne or Henry VIII, who eventually just walked away himself. Well,
and the power of, again, and this isn't, I'm not like taking this from the stance of defending Christianity or anything like that, but just as we know in history, the power of the Bible itself was wielded in many ways. Even to this day, on a small scale, you could go into a church, and there's some churches that the preachers are sort of wielding that power of the Bible in sometimes nefarious ways with some of these churches.
Yeah.
Not all of them. Again, I'm not, slandering churches or anything. I'm just saying that the power of the Bible can be abused in many ways. And back then, when Christianity was huge on a global scale, to where the power, people did not dare oppose anything at all with the Bible. So the churches, they could easily, and there was some divination mixed in there, but they could easily control these kings and get them to do their bidding, and it's crazy. So anyways, you can.
Yeah, well, the Bible still in witchcraft is used. If you in hoodoo, for instance, you can say anything you want as a spell in hoodoo, but the go-to, at least in the South, is to use the Book of Psalms. It's the Book of Psalms is a spell book in any other terms. If you look at the higher numbered ones, the imprecatory Psalms, you have things that say, may his wife be a widow, may his son be an orphan, things of that sort, where they're cursing people and using the words within the Bible in order to do it.
Well, I don't remember may his penis fly off and feed fed corn nuts in the Bible, but
yeah, no, that wasn't in there. That was something else. That was apocryphal, but it was used, all the way up until the Salem witch trials.
Right.
It was kind of embarrassing that they were actually still using it when they figured out that wasn't a thing. But and that's interesting story in of itself. If you remember the Crucible, which isn't history necessarily, it was a story, but the only person in Salem who did not get persecuted was the one who was actually performing witchcraft, Tutijaba. She was the African slave who was doing witchcraft and divination and things of that sort, which set the whole thing off. And she was the only one that wasn't persecuted for it. She was property, essentially.
Right.
It'd be like you going outside and shooting your car. Why would you do that?
Right.
That was essentially the thinking at the time. But everybody else in the village who was an enemy of the establishment, yeah, they were the ones that were persecuted.
And Bob says, in the definition they had of witchcraft, it is surprising Jesus was not declared a witch, considering his miracles.
That was actually true. He was.
Yeah, he was.
He was
cast.
Convicted in court amongst the Jews. He was convicted of sedition and sorcery. They removed that out of later versions of the Bible, but that was what he was actually convicted of. It wasn't proclaiming himself to be the Messiah. It was sedition and sorcery, because he was demanded by the priests to perform miracles inside the temple. And if you couldn't do that, it was outside of God, which was sorcery. So they charged him with sedition and sorcery, and that's what he was executed for.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's why I always encourage people too, that if you are into Christianity, which is fine. Again, everybody to each their own, right? But I always encourage people, to make sure you read different ancient scriptures that existed at that time. There's other, like the Jewish Bible. There's other books that were recovered from the Dead Sea Scrolls. Some of these things that existed in the ancient times that were translated and really helped to give you that full, better understanding of things too. So I just wanted to interject that in there.
Yeah, it's true. Even the Stoics, like Celsus and Porphyry. Porphyry was in 200 AD when the Gnostics were actually, it was pre-Christian, the takeover of Rome, but they were prevalent all throughout Greece. And he was having philosophical arguments with them all the time. He was essentially the Rush Limbaugh of his day. And he threw up all of these different arguments for their, scriptures and their art, their philosophical things. And they were Gnostics. in that they were very philosophical themselves. And he batted down a lot of what they said because it was not real in the physical sense. He was very learned in Stoic philosophy, which was binary. It either is or it isn't. And the Gnostics couldn't handle it. They actually burned almost everything that he ever wrote. And the only things that ever existed were those who were debunking his arguments. So all his original writings are gone. The Alexandria Library was burnt with all his stuff in it. So he's one of the few that actually you can find real history through those writings.
Right.
But Celsus was his student, and same thing,
Now, maybe as we talk a little bit about like some myths and things about witchcraft,
Okay.
what do you think would surprise people the most to learn, like people that are outside of it and they kind of look in and maybe they're kind of afraid, or just, I don't know, maybe they have all these little misconceptions. What do you think would be most surprising to them to learn about witchcraft?
Harry Potter isn't real.
Man.
I wish it was.
Throwing everything away. No, I'm just kidding. I don't even have any. I never even read the books. I don't have anything. I watched like the first 2 movies. That was it. Yeah. I know I probably should. I should have watched everything, or at least read the books. But
yeah, we're nuts about it around here. Hang on a second. I got a weird message. There we go. The strangest thing to me is the relationship that, when I was coming into it myself, was the relationship between the dead and the gods, both of which are spirits. They're not, the gods themselves aren't capital G gods. They're lowercase gods. They're higher level spirits that may or may not have ever been human. They are personified elements of nature, but they respond to us the same way that the dead do, just at a slower pace. Time to them is much different than time is to us. Being able to
elemental,
yeah, but it's a living thing. Unlike the idea of Thor, where you have this Norse idea of what Thor is, not the Marvel character, of course, but
right.
The deity Thor is an idea that people really don't have a relationship with Thor or Zeus, things of that sort. But in other cultures like Santeria, like Palo Mayombe, these things, we interact with them every day. They respond to us with actual messages through divination, of course, but also through promises kept. You do divination and you ask for proof of their working, and they will provide proof. And it is unmistakable. That sort of thing going into it was mind-blowing. In Santeria and Palo Mayombe, they also have possession. Not in the exorcist sort of way, spinning the heads and the pea soup, but dances that put you into a higher state, a hypnotic state, and your body is then assumed by the spirit, by this deity. Crazy things can happen. There's a ceremony in Santeria called a drum, a bada, where you ask a particular deity or deities to come down and mount someone, to possess them.
Right.
They will prove that they are who they say they are through some sort of act or miracle that cannot be performed, cannot be faked. My godfather, he died, right after Katrina. But before that, there was a drum, literally a year before that, where we had the spirit Ogun come down. Now, Ogun is considered to be like Mars. He's the warrior of
Right.
war, metalworking. He's also the protector of police and firemen and surgeons, anything that works with metal.
Okay.
That being the case, he has all of these implements that are symbols of his authority and his power. When he came down and mounted someone, my godfather he's a little bit of a skeptic on all of the stuff still. He was not quite sure that this was a real mount. He thought it was being faked. And the deity in African language, said, "You think I'm lying. You think I'm not here. You think I'm fake." And my godfather's, "No, no, no. I believe you. I believe you." Of course, saw right through it. The deity reached around, grabbed a straight razor out of one of the implements that he has at the altar, a straight razor, and went, cut his tongue in half. I mean, it went like this. I saw pink on the inside of this slit. I was like,
what?
It was gross. No blood. It was just pink. I could see the pink meat. And then he goes, and it was healed. This was during the mount. At that point, my godfather was like, "Okay, I will take your word for it now. You are who you say you are."
Right.
I'd never seen anything like that before in my life. And to be perfectly honest, I wasn't quite sure I saw what I saw. I asked other people. They said, "Yeah, that happened."
That's crazy. I mean, it just makes you wonder because, I've seen some amazing magicians in my life and do some crazy looking stuff. So it's like, are these people, I don't know, like it's so weird. I'm always, you would think somebody like me would be a pretty good believer, but I've always been on the fence, even though I've witnessed some things in my life. It's weird. And I mean, you don't, could have been a parlor trick.
That was my thinking. I was going through looking at how could this possibly be faked? Some of it, perfectly well, it can't be faked, like the tongue thing, because when you cut your tongue, that's a wound. That wound actually will show up no matter what, in blood too. I mean, especially on the tongue.
Right.
That same bata, the same drum. There was a 92-year-old man who got mounted by a batala, which is his persona or personality. A batala is an old man, somebody who's hunched over and carries a cane. That's because he's the oldest of he's basically Zeus.
Right.
He mounted an old man, which is dangerous because a lot of times the heart can't take it. The possession itself, it will kill people.
Right.
But this old man, once he got mounted, he stood upright and literally did a backflip, landed on his back on hard concrete, then got up and started to dance. No pain, no nothing. And the people who are mounted have no memory of what happened. They don't know. And to them, it's an instantaneous thing. It's like going to sleep and waking up. There's nothing in between. There's no dream, no nothing. No memory.
Well, I almost said something bad, but I wanted to take a moment, and I almost segued the wrong way, but I wanted to take a moment to say that everybody that's watching, please send some prayers or some good thoughts to Terry Lynn, my wife. You all know her. She's normally very active in the chat, but she's feeling under the weather tonight. She was trying to watch and trying to hang in there, but she's just real tired, exhausted, just was real shaky. So we're just monitoring that real close tonight. So just thought I'd throw that in there. But I almost said it sounds like my wife needs to be mounted. Maybe that would help, but then that sounds bad. So, maybe that might cheer her up a little. But
what is she got a fever going on? COVID, something like that?
Just it started out with real shaky, heavy arms, kind of heavy hands. Just hands were real shaky. So she was just kind of sipping some water, trying to breathe, trying not to have a panic attack. On top of that, so she's just been kind of resting, and so pretty much that right now, just kind of still a little uneasy, but
Well,
that,
send her my regards, because when you lose control of your body in any capacity, whether it be getting sick or getting lightheaded or anything of that sort, it's very stressful.
Yeah, oh yeah, and it doesn't happen near as much to us. And we used to. Well, I don't get sick hardly at all. But when my son, now he's 13, my youngest, the only one left in the house, when he was going to public school, like 7 years ago was his last year that he was in public school. He'd bring home sickness all the time. I think I got sick like 4 times in a year that year. My wife was sick like 10 times. He missed like 40 days of school altogether through the year. And it was just horrible. The kids were like right up in each other's faces, sneezing and like, hey, how are you? There's no personal space with kids, And ever since he went and was doing public school at home now, it's like, I get sick maybe once every few years. My wife only a few times a year now, and like he barely ever gets sick. So that makes a huge difference.
Kids bring home and spread the diseases. It was the same when my kids were growing up.
Yeah, and
came home.
Well, we had all of our other kids are grown up and now giving us grandkids, but he was the later in life. He was the Daytona vacation surprise. But now, like, as it's like now I'm at that point now where it's like I'm at that crucial point in my life where I'm actually trying to stop gaining weight and start to get healthier and lose weight again. Mm-hmm. So it's like I'm having to try to reverse things because I've never been this big in my life, and now I'm starting to feel actual effects. I used to always be like awesome back, my knees were great. Mm-hmm. I didn't have normal problems like everybody else always complained about. Now with my weight, it's given me a whole new set of problems the bigger I was getting. And it was on my knees, and then now I've been getting this weird foot problem where I'm getting these pains and stuff. So it's like, no, I gotta quit. So now, and my wife, she was gaining weight too and stuff. So like now it's like, am I starting to get diabetes? Is she starting to get diabetic? Mm-hmm. So these are always factors. It's like normally when you are monitor, somewhat a healthy shape or whatever, at least you can kind of judge things a little better. When you gain weight and you start getting into that morbidly obese column, then it adds this whole other set of factors where it's like, oh man. And when you go to the doctors, they give you the speech and they're like, well, you need to lose some weight so that way you can, I know, doc. So,
well, it real advances on that front. And you don't, if you're borderline diabetic type 2, they have medications that you can take every day that are real cheap. They're, it's like $20 for 100 pills and stuff. And right. It basically helps you regulate sugar better with your pancreas. The benefit, the side effect of this drug, and I have to look it up for you, but the side effect of this drug is that it actually helps the telomeres on your genetic code from snapping off, and you live longer. Just because virtue of your genes don't degrade as quickly. You actually have it's not a fountain of youth necessarily, but it freezes your aging process.
This sounds like something that, no offense, it just reminds me of something I would hear like from Alex Jones or something.
Yeah, no, it's a real.
You guys got to try this.
It's been around forever, and I'll have to look at it. My doctor almost gave it to me because my blood was going towards the diabetic thing, and I'm like, well, I read about this drug, and she's like, yeah, it does that. And I was like, well, could we do that? She's like, no, you're going to have to actually cross that line before I can actually prescribe it to you. I'm like, oh, come on. Do I have to be diabetic in order to get this thing? She's like, pretty close. So I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, well, we'll work on that.
I mean, so far I'm not, or neither one of us are declared diabetic, but I mean, I just know it's going to happen if I keep, if I didn't stop and turn things around, because it was going to get to that point. I mean, anytime I've never been this big in my life, so now it's like, in fact, earlier before the show, I actually went and got our second elliptical because we had gotten an elliptical. I'd used it for a week, and now my wife wants to use it, but we figure, hey, we'd do it at the same time. And so now we got two ellipticals in the basement. We can kind of work out together, make it a little fun and whatnot. But
that's nice.
Yeah, so we're gonna try to get in shape and whatnot, a little bit more. So see, folks, you watch this show, you get more information than just paranormal, even witchcraft. We're even talking about health. Look at this, you're getting all kinds of fun stuff and good information. So hope you guys are keeping track. So yeah, so I guess bringing this all back around, what other thing, like a lot of times people see this sort of modern version witchcraft where they see a lot of times it's these women that are casting these spells for these love enchantments and things like that. I mean,
right.
Where does that all sort of stem from, and how much of that is in practice to this day? I mean, it seems like it is kind of pretty popular still, in a hidden way.
Yeah, well, the Wicca movement that came about, or Wiccan movement, I see Robert asked a question about that, didn't give birth until the 1950s. Gerald Gardner wrote a book saying that his grandmother taught him witchcraft when he was a kid, and he, wrote this book on basically how to perform witchcraft, how to perform the initiations and things of that sort. And a lot of that was to bypass the laws of the time. In England, it was still illegal to be a witch. Witchcraft was a real crime. As a matter of fact, they convicted a woman of witchcraft when she started talking. She was a medium, and she started giving out crucial battle information of what was happening during World War II. And it was dead that were giving her these instructions. This is what, submarines are doing. This is where they're at, and describing all kinds of military intelligence that were getting out, and it was becoming dangerous. So the government came in, shut her down, and accused her of witchcraft, convicted her of witchcraft, and she kind of went away until the end of the war. And then,
was she actually using witchcraft, or was she remote viewing or something?
She was talking to the dead.
Oh, okay.
The dead were giving her this information.
Oh, okay.
Because at the same time, a lot of this, it was probably winding down the old medium parlor table tipping that was going on, that was really big at the turn of the century. A lot of that was still in flux during the war. And she was a good medium. She was actually getting real information from the dead. Too good, actually. But she was the last one to be convicted of witchcraft in England, and they, decided after that law was really not good to have on the books still. But Gerald Gardner was afraid that he was going to be convicted of this, so he came out with a religion called Wicca that sort of gave him protections against that witchcraft charge, and produced books of the initiations, the spells, things of that sort. And it took off here in the United States during the 60s.
Right.
Early paranormal investigators like Hans Holzer interviewed these groups. The group that I was associated with, he interviewed us too during the 80s in his last book before he dropped dead, called Witches. But aside from that, they proliferated a lot of the movement into witchcraft because they talked about all these different groups and what they were doing. Margot Adler did the same thing when she wrote Drawing Down the Moon. And, people were so fascinated with these writings that they decided to investigate the neo-pagan movement themselves. I, of course, got involved in a different way and found out all these books, met Hans Holzer and all of that after the fact. But they essentially let me know how the history of it unfolded.
Now, I wanted to shift gears back to sort of some history on spells and enchantments. I want to read a passage, and I just want to kind of get a little bit of your take and on that as well. The passage I'm going to read is from the Book of Enoch.
Okay.
And it's 6 chapters 1 through 7 and 2, and that is and this is just a passage. This is when the fallen angels came down to earth.
Mm-hmm.
So they said, and they took wives for themselves, and everyone chose for himself one each. And they began to go into them and were promiscuous with them. And they taught them charms and spells.
Mm-hmm.
And they showed them the cutting of roots and trees. And then, of course, it goes on to say they became pregnant and bore large giants, and their height was 3,000 cubits. So, in a way, that passage from that transcript is sort of identifying a potential source of where the knowledge of spells and enchantments and cutting of roots and stuff possibly came from fallen angels. How do you feel about that?
Well, I take it as word, right off the bat. If you're an ancient aliens theorist, that would, aliens came down and taught humanity science, and that's science and medicine. And they chose to imbue that information with the women they bred with or fornicated with or, had orgies with, depending on your point of view.
Right.
But the information did come from on high, whether you want to go ancient alien side or angel side. It is divinities, bestowing that on humanity.
Right. So I guess you would say, like, if you lived on Earth at that time and these beings came down from the sky, you can interpret them as either or. They could either be fallen angels or they could be actual aliens from another planet or something.
Right.
Either way, I guess wouldn't truly matter unless you were, again, following the path of Holy Spirit inspired scripture.
Right.
So that's cool. I just thought I'd bring that up. I always, that's one of the things is I've always followed the Christian side of some of the scriptures and histories of things. I just always find that fascinating. And since we were talking about that, when I read that, again, a lot of people don't always acknowledge the Book of Enoch, or Christians don't typically, which they should. I don't know why they wouldn't. But
it's Enoch is apocryphal, isn't it? It's not in the King James version.
No, it's not. It's the only Bible to still have Enoch in it is the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. They're the only ones that still have Enoch in their Bible. Enoch was actually, the Book of Enoch was held closely by ancient Christians, and it actually was
interesting.
It was held very closely to them because it fits right in as a missing piece of the Bible, and it fits perfect in there. And in fact, is referenced a few times in the Bible and even quoted in the Book of Job. So it fits, and it was divine inspired. And Enoch was one of only two men to not die and go straight to heaven, and was God's righteous scribe. So the fact that the Christians denounce Book of Enoch, it's because they don't know any better, and that all stemmed from, and this is going to bring it all the way back to what you talked about earlier, the Catholic influence back in the early, about 500 years ago in
Mhm.
the churches. There was a huge satanical influence also when there was this right of power. And then Constantine and things like that, they decided what was going to be in the Bible, what was not going to be. And there was a bunch of stuff that shouldn't have been.
Mhm.
But the Book of Enoch was purposely set aside because of what it talked about the devil and things like that, and the story of the fallen angels and all that stuff. So it's really cool. I love that part of history in that sense of scripture, and ended up being so important that was in the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Well, the Ethiopians are uh, a lot of them are the direct descendants of Solomon.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, when the Queen of Sheba, which is the Yiddish pronunciation of Saba, Saba was the biggest empire in the day. Their money was in incense, frankincense, and myrrh. They controlled it all. And, you know, when the Queen of Sheba or Saba basically became pregnant from Solomon, they escaped, most say, with the Ark of Covenant into Ethiopia with his son. And to this day, that's, you will find uh, the Jews of Ethiopia are actually pre-Babylonian invasion in their practices. They still have sacrificial priests. In modern day Judaism, all the sacrificial priests were killed. So
Right.
they lost a lot of their practices when Babylon invaded. Not in Ethiopia. The tradition of the way it was in Solomon's day still exists. So it's the fact that it's in the Ethiopian Bible, I think, says a lot
Oh yeah,
about
and
it.
well, and what I think too, in the 1700s, I believe there was an explorer that went there, and he had first discovered the Book of Enoch in their Bible. So he brought it back to England and whatnot, and that's how it kind of spread into Western culture, um, but was never accepted by the church either. They didn't realize. I think what it was too is I don't think they realized. I think they just felt like it was something that the Ethiopians just put, and they could never validate it. But
Mhm.
then when the Dead Sea Scrolls was discovered, and then they realized, oh my God, there's copies of the Book of Enoch in
Mhm.
here along with all the parts of the Bible, blah blah blah. And then the true story really unfolded. But by then, churches aren't going to go back and say, well, all that stuff we preached and all that stuff about the Bible and all this stuff. Well, if we acknowledge this book here,
Yeah.
then it's going to take away from all the stuff we said. So we're just going to discount it and say, and we won't talk about it. So,
Well, in 1997, Pope John II finally came out and admitted the church was wrong. The earth does revolve around the sun. They did that in 1997. It takes them a long time to admit they've ever made a mistake. So,
right. Well, and that's what I'm saying. So for me, I just again, it's not that I follow a set path. I believe these words, but for me, I love the scriptures that talk about this. I just love the way things come together and the things that the people will push aside. And I've talked to some friends of mine that this is why I love studying these things myself, because when you study yourself, you really get a good idea of, what's what. When you listen to other people and things like that, they just tell you what they want you to know, and they overlook the other stuff. Well, anyways, I would talk to a few of my. In fact, I even had a buddy that went to college and studied the Bible and studied these things. But
mhm.
when I talked to him about the Book of Enoch, he's like, "What do you mean?" I'm like, what? Like, why would you not know? I'm like, do you know who Enoch is? And it's like we started going through, and I started talking to him, and he's just like, nope, nope, it's not inspired by the Holy Spirit, blah blah blah. I'm like, what? Anyways, but that's a
Yeah.
whole nother argument. But but anyways, I just thought I'd bring that up to you because I always found it fascinating that to me, when you look back at the fact that we know there was giants. We know there was giants on this earth. We know that. When you look at a lot of the lore of the old cultures of these hybrid creatures, these minotaurs, centaurs, the old Greek mythology, right?
Right.
But cultures where you have your Sumerians, your fish head people, all of these hybrids you see, right? And you see this and you know what's going on. And then when you also get the scripture like the Book of Enoch that talks about and actually gives you, and I don't want to say the truth or anything like that, because again, I don't know. But when they at least acknowledge and they talk about these fallen angels and they go through all of these things, and it talks about why the giants came about, why these things came about, what happened to these things, and it all sort of locks in and makes sense in that way. Again, I'm not saying that scientifically or anything. I'm not trying to make a case for this, but I'm just saying I just find it fascinating that you read about these things and you're like, wow, that's cool. You know how it talks about this and how they mated with different animals and fornicated with them, whether they were aliens, whether they were fallen angels. But it was just fascinating and how it all ties in and how and it just made sense how, again, we actually see this in other cultures, and here we have a book that backs that up and ties everything in, and it's like, and then people just ignore those things, and it's like, why? I mean, why? So
the problem comes where up until quite recently, the idea of writing history or news or chronicling events that took place, the style of writing factual who, what, where, how wasn't in play. People wrote and described things in a poetic sense. So when you write in poetry, it can you've got words like in Greek, you have 5 different meanings for the word love. When you start doing that, people can throw, well, that's not what they actually meant, because you can interpret it this way or this way or this way or this way. And it really comes down to reading past the poetry and looking at what is likely. Because looking at it from their point of view, they were describing what they saw. It was just they lacked the language in order to write it factually. So they wrote it poetically. Like the difference between the Iliad and the Odyssey. The Iliad is historical. It describes the invasion of Troy, the Trojan War. The Odyssey, on the other hand, written by the same guy, is, filled with, unicorns and cyclopses and, the god coming out of the ocean and slapping the boat around, walking into Hades itself to make a sacrifice of a goat. It was all poetry, but it described.
Are you sure? Can you imagine it was really the other way? It's like he told the Odyssey, right? And everybody's just like, dude, you can't say that. Like, you can't tell the truth. Like, just word it like this. Tone it back a little bit. Nobody's going to believe the truth.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm just saying.
Well,
I would think different. I think reverse.
Even the Iliad had some poetic license involved, but it was, more accurate as far as history is concerned than what you saw throughout the rest of the world. Because he was a reporter on the ground, Homer.
Right. Bob says, Stacey, since all energy, well, earlier, I see you see me did ask what mounting meant, but Bob said, yeah, because she asked if it meant taking over. He said, yes. But Stacey, he says, Stacey, since all energy, work, and healing depend on intent, do you feel spells cast by witches have the same power of intent, or does a person's guardian angel have the ability to diffuse the spell?
Yes. I know that was a lot of questions all at once, but it was yes. The person, witches really have no power themselves. It is their relationship with the spirits or the dead that make things happen. They're the messengers. They're the ones that act behind the veil. upon this world. So that being the case, people who have guardian spirits or guardian angels can also intercept or block or, do things on the behalf of the target. The problem being is that most of the time, guardian angels don't respond unless asked. So you have to know that you're being hexed. Somebody gave you the eye or things of that sort. Then you can ask for the protection and do things to wipe yourself clean of that energetic mess.
Right.
So
now, do you kind of piggybacking on this? What do you feel like we have any power to exert anything out there ourselves to manifest psychokinetically?
Not independently. We can basically like a AA battery. You put enough AA batteries in something and you can start a car. It is, accumulative. I've noticed this in seances. You have a seance, table tipping seance, for example. You have to have a minimum of 7 people in order to get the thing to move. One person can't do it. The combined energy of the group focused on one specific thing can move large objects, large, heavy objects.
Right.
13 people, around a big table, weighs 200 to 300 pounds. That thing will dance like it's a balloon. But you really need the intent of everyone in the room.
So what about karma? Like, how do you feel about when, how people say, well, don't think it, don't put it out there. It's almost like you're uploading it in the universe, right? Don't put the karma out there because then it's going to come back. So is that similar, or is that,
That's similar. Everything is a request. If you start, you'll notice this once you start going through a remote viewing course. You'll be driving down the road and be like, gosh, I wonder if there's a speed trap up here, up the road. And then all of a sudden you'll hear yes or no. That answer comes to you because you asked the question. Whether you said it out loud or not makes no difference. You sent the information out to the universe, and the universe asked, and you shall receive. That information came down.
Bob said most of us are asked for protection before we start investigations. And of course, IUCUCME says, so that's why they have circles. Yeah. I guess talking about the seances, right? I mean, with seances, obviously it's that power, collective power, as Stacey elaborated on, and that always makes sense. And especially with the valedictorian methods, Victorian, the valedictorian methods, the smart methods. No, the Victorian methods. Everything was always through a spirit guide, or like a psychic, used to convey. That was sort of the difference. People would go to the psychic, and it was always about the psychic making that connection. Versus nowadays, we don't use those methods. We do now, where people are getting back into using those methods. But anyways, So, but the ability to have that collective power, I think that's pretty cool. We could use some collective power nowadays. I can tell you that much. But
well, they've actually done experiments with that too. The FBI did an experiment where everybody meditated on world peace at the same time all around the world, and they saw terrorism fall by 43%. So they've actually done studies on this to determine that our influence, what we send into the universe, actually manifests our world.
I think it manifests some of our troops to go kick their ass. But anyways, guys, if you have any last minute questions, make sure you get in there. We're going to start wrapping up. I think it's been a fun show. I've really enjoyed a lot of the education and discussions I've had. I want to say thank you, Stacey, for coming on here. It's always a pleasure to bring you're full of knowledge. I love picking at your brain. Anytime we get guests like you on here, it's great to dive into multiple subjects and have fun. I love learning. So, you know, I never claim to be an expert at all. I mean, I'm a babe in the woods, man. Sometimes, you know, and no matter how much you read, no matter how much you learn, all of a sudden you meet people and you learn this whole other world and this whole other thing. And you're like, oh my God. So there's so much out there, guys. Keep, like I always tell you guys to seek the truth. Keep learning, keep learning.
Yeah. I've been in this for 30 years and I'm still know nothing. You know, there's a vast amounts of information and experience that I don't think I'll ever get to.
And even then, sometimes you're just like, how did I miss that? Like, how did I miss learning about this? Or how did I miss this whole culture of this or whatever? It's crazy because you get so focused on learning this, and this. And all of a sudden you're like, oh man, whoa, over there. Look at all that. So it's cool. I love it. So, but guys, yeah, Bob said he enjoyed the show. I see me said, bring him back. This was so interesting. And guys, I'm sure he'll be back. You know, I'm sure he was on and he's back again this time. Who knows? We'll have him back on. Hell, we've had Bob on here like 4 or 5 times. I can't even remember how many times we had Bob on here. So we'll have to even maybe see about getting Bob back on here. Yeah, I'm putting you on the spot. But guys, thank you so much. Stacey, stick around as we end this. But other than that, guys, you hang in there. We'll see you next week. And remember, seek the truth.